and they meet every other Monday. So our next meeting is going to be Monday, March 8th from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. You can find this on the website. You can find it on the app if you want more information. But that's an option for you. Pretty awesome thing for ladies. We have a Bible study that happens midweek, Wednesday around 6:30, and it's an awesome time just to gather and grow together. Again, Wednesday night, 6:30. We also have our youth program, Reach, that meets every Tuesday night at 6:30. It's a whole lot of fun. I'm a little biased because I'm there and I help lead it up. But we have an awesome worship team, youth worship team that does some amazing music every week. We play games. We have food every week. We have a message, small groups. So if you have a middle schooler or a high schooler who's looking for something to do on Tuesday nights, please check it out. Pass the word around because it's something that's really, really exciting. So there's a quick snapshot of a few ongoing ministries that we have. We hope you get involved. So this morning, though, I'm going to jump in because I have quite a bit to talk about. And last week, Mark started a series called On the Threshold. And it's really an opportune time for us to do this because we feel like we're, as Journey Church, kind of on the threshold of some new and exciting things, on some breakthroughs. And Mark's whole message last week is, what is your threshold? What is stopping you from taking a step that will help push you forward? What's stopping you from seeing God move in some amazing ways in your life? What is your threshold? And we all have them. We all have issues that have been tripping us up, whether it's sin or if it's just habits or it's just not trusting that God has you where He needs you in your life. Whatever it may be, we all have these thresholds that stop us. But if we continue to push, if we continue to push forward, that maybe we're on the verge of this breakthrough that can change everything for us. And so I hope that you really took that to heart. I hope you listened because these words that God gives us are hopefully something that you can apply and take to heart and take them out into your life. God is a God who is ready to give us breakthroughs, but are you keeping your eyes on Him? And so this morning, I want to continue this theme on the threshold, but this morning I want to take a look at abundance. Abundance, the word abundance, because I truly believe that God works in abundance. And the more we work through this series, I really think it's just really highlighting some of the attributes, the characteristics of God, and then some of our shortcomings and some of our characteristics that aren't so good. So this morning, are you on the threshold of seeing God move in abundance? In looking through Scripture, some of the things that become really clear is that our God, over and over from the very beginning of time all the way through the New Testament, is that He is a very abundant God. God is full of love, full of grace, full of mercy, full of truth and fun and creativity and blessings and teaching, and the list just goes on and on and on. So are you on the threshold of the abundance of God? And I think the answer is yes, because God is an abundant God. And how exciting is that? How exciting is it that we serve a God who chooses to show His abundance in our lives and through the things that He calls us to do in the world that He has created? And I want to take a look at what abundance looked like in the life of Christ. And so I sat down and I started to take some time looking at the life of Jesus and how Jesus acted in abundance. And I came back with way too many stories to share today. Like we'd be here for hours and hours and hours and hours and probably not scratch the surface to share all the times that Jesus acted in abundance. It was funny, I was sitting down taking notes, and when we do these series, Mark and I sit down and we kind of pray over what God puts on, pray over what God is putting on our heart and where we want to take these messages, and we come up with a title, and sometimes we're not that creative, so we apologize. Sometimes if the titles aren't the best, but we try and we do our best. So we sit down and we pray over it, and then we start to look at scriptures and divide these weeks up. And as I looked at some scriptures, it was just like the list got longer and longer and longer and longer of how God acted in abundance. And I told Mark on Wednesday, I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to narrow it down. Like, I don't know how to narrow this one down because I want to share so much because God is an abundant God. And if that doesn't get you excited that He acts in abundance, then I don't know what will. So check this out. Let me just give you a handful of scriptures. I'm going to rattle them off that are so powerful. 2 Corinthians 9:8. And God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work. Ephesians 3:20. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. Psalms 8, verses 3 through 5. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you set in place. What is mankind that you are mindful to them? Human beings that you care for them. You've made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. What an abundant God we serve. Abundant in more ways than we count. He's able to bless us abundantly in all times so that we can do his work. He's able to do immeasurably more than we can even imagine. And yet, he set the stars in the universe in its place with the work of his fingers. And yet he chooses to have a personal relationship with us, to make us just a little lower than angels. How awesome is that? How awesome is our God? Are you on the threshold of seeing God move abundantly? Are you one step away from God doing something amazing in your life? And maybe, just maybe, God is already working abundantly in you. You just need to open your eyes. How many of you have ever almost missed something really amazing? Like that if you would have not taken one more step in your life, you would have never got to experience what God intended, or just something amazing in general. Anybody ever been there? You almost missed something amazing. How many of you actually have missed something amazing and then you actually realized it later on? You're like, man, I missed it. Okay, yeah. So that happens even in the silly things in life. I remember as a kid, you'd hear a firework go off and you didn't get to see it. And you're like, man, I missed it. Or I would be sitting in a theater and you'd be watching a movie and you'd get kind of slightly sidetracked. Anybody get distracted at times? And you miss something that's extremely vital to the storyline, but you can't rewind it because you're not at home. You're in the theater, so you're like bugging your friend, and your friend's like, hush, I'm trying to watch this movie. You're like, man, what happened? I missed it. Like, I always hate when I miss something important. And how much more is this true in our walk with Christ? How often are we missing the important things that Jesus wants us to see, that Jesus wants us to experience, but we've shifted our focus from him and we miss something amazing? Are we missing the things that Jesus is doing and wanting to do in our lives? Because this is what I've come to realize. Jesus is always working. Always. When you sleep, Jesus is still working. When you eat, Jesus is still working. Every bit of our lives, Jesus is working. And he works not only in the complicated and in the really serious circumstances in our lives, he also works in the simplicity. And so that's where I want to start this morning. We're going to go through 3 different phases that Jesus works in. It doesn't scratch the surface, so I'll apologize uphand, but we have time to go through 3 different phases that I think Jesus works in. And I want to start with the simplicity, because I think it's so beautiful how Jesus works in our everyday life. And to do that, I want to start with the very first miracle that Jesus did. The very first miracle, it was really before his time. You'll see what I'm talking about in this passage. We'll read it and we'll break it down. So this is John chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. It says this: On the 3rd day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee, and Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And nearby stood 6 stone jars, water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And so they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, "Now draw out and take it to the master." And so they did. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine, and he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. And then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now." Now, I really think this story is pretty exciting. And it's a simple act of abundance in a simple everyday life. I mean, every day Jesus is abundant. And yes, in this situation and this time period and culturally, it may have been a little frowned upon for someone to run out of wine at a wedding. It would have been a little bit of a misstep. But I mean, think about it. Is this truly the concern of Jesus? Like, should this truly be the concern of the Son of God as he's walking? Should this really be his concern? I mean, this is just an everyday event. Yes, it's a wedding. Yes, it's important, but this is Jesus we're talking about, the Son of God. And even Jesus was like, Mom, this isn't my time right now. He says, woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. That word woman doesn't have any like negative connotations. He's not yelling at his mom, woman, what are you doing? Like that's not what, when you look at the Greek and Hebrew, that's not what that means. It's just like, hey mom, like this isn't my time. Like why are you involving me in this situation? But you gotta love how he proceeds. You can't deny your mom, like, right? As sons, you just can't deny your mom. Even Jesus couldn't deny his mom. So he moves forward and he proceeds. He listens to her. But not only does he listen to her, I love the way that he goes above and beyond. And he goes above and beyond in two ways here. For starters, he fills 6 jars of water that hold 20 to 30 gallons, and he fills them to the brim. That's a lot of water, right? You can imagine these big stone basins, and they're just full of water that you come in and you wash your hands and you get cleaned up. You wash your face a little bit before. It was a cultural thing, and it was basically mandatory that you wash yourself before coming into the wedding. And so that's what he does. He fills them to the brim. Now, if you don't like math, that's okay, because I really don't like math either, but I crunched the numbers for you. That's between 120 and 180 gallons of water that they have here. A lot of water. And he takes that water and he turns it into wine. You talk about abundance. Like, that's a lot of wine. I mean, right? That's way too much wine. I did the math on that. That's like 900 bottles of wine. Apparently, had to do it, had to Google it. There's a gallon makes 5 bottles of wine. So he just made 900 bottles of wine. He doesn't just do it little. He does it in abundance. And not only that, the master of the banquet said that this was the best wine. That typically you bring out the bad wine at the end of the night when people have had too much to drink. This was the best wine. I love the fact that Jesus is so abundant in everything he does. You got to understand this. Jesus is working abundantly even in the simplicity of life. Are you looking for how Jesus is moving in the simple everyday things? Like Mary, Jesus' mom, are you asking Jesus to show up in your life? Are you inviting him into the simple as well as the complicated? He is an abundant God, and his brilliance is in everything. Everywhere we look, you can see his abundant hand, his provisions, his creativity, his blessings. What an abundant God, even in the simplicity of life. And that should get you excited. When I look out over God's creation, I see how the land thrives in all seasons. Who likes to just stare out over God's creation? Anybody just like a nature watcher? It's some pretty stuff when you get out there. God is a brilliant creator. But I love looking out at his creation and how the land kind of thrives in all different seasons. Like in spring, you've got new life. And you've got new life for plants and animals, and the provisions are made so that it can happen. The rain comes and the sun comes and the temperatures start to rise. It's abundant. And then summer brings on the crops that carry life, and it brings on so much fun and excitement as weather is beautiful. And then you have fall that brings on the withering of things, but God didn't just say, okay, it's fall and things are going to die. But brilliant colors, like the leaves are changing, this show of magnificence of his creativity that even when things are dwindling and dying, there's beauty in it. And then you have winter that brings on, snow and the sun glistening off of it. And yes, the withering and the dying away, but preparation for spring to come again where everything will restart and life and growth and bloom. It's just what an abundance of beauty in the simplicity. I remember last spring sitting out and watching the young young rabbits and the zeal they had in life. Like these little bunnies just coming to life. I'd watch them. They'd play games of tag. They'd be zipping and jumping across the yard and bouncing off logs and rocks. And it's so funny because I watched these two rabbits. One would be hopping across the yard and the other would like bolt out of the woods and like tackle them and they go rolling. And then the other one would chase them around and they were just having the biggest time of their life, playing and having fun. And it put a smile on my face, knowing that God created them to play. Isn't that cool? That God created them to play. That God is even abundant in play. That God is abundant in humor. We don't typically talk about those characteristics and attribute them to God, but we should. Look at His creation. It's full of play. It's full of excitement. It's full of humor. And it puts a smile on my face. I learned this really well through my first dog as an adult living in my own place. We have any dog people here? Anybody like dogs? Okay, if you don't like dogs, I'm sorry. I feel bad for you because dogs are awesome. So we won't argue that one. But I do love dogs. But I learned this really well because this dog was an awesome, I think, abundant gift from God. Her name was Layla. And she was as goofy as they come. Like half the time I called her Doofus because I felt like that's who she was. She was goofy, just all over the place, uncoordinated. She was smart now. She wasn't just like rock dumb, but she was smart. And but she made me laugh and she brought so much joy into my life. And boy, did I think that she was just this huge gift of abundance. She was about 55 pounds, and she never understood why she couldn't sit on my lap 24/7. She thought she weighed like 3 pounds, and she would try to slink up over my neck and dangle there and suffocate me with her weight. She was just the best dog. Truly a gift of abundance in my life. And some of you might be thinking, well, that's silly, Matt. She's just a dog. Do you really think God works through dogs? Yes. Yes, I do. You can make fun of me if you want. You can pick at me if you want. You're going to lose the argument with Mark as well because he'll argue it is probably more so than me that dogs can be a blessing of abundance from God. I got her during my time in seminary, and I just felt like God knew that I needed a companion. I'd be pouring out hours and hours and hours of work and study and reading and paper, and in this season, I needed someone who would be by my side literally every second of the day that I was home. A companion that would make me laugh all day long with her personality. A companion that would teach me patience because, yes, I needed to learn patience for the years to come as I graduated from seminary and got into ministry and then decided to have a kid and just on and on and on. I needed patience. And so he would teach me patience through this dog. I remember one day I was so excited, spring, planting a garden for the very first time, right? Like so excited. And I didn't know what I was doing. So I just bought some plants and I worked all morning long into the afternoon and I got done and I was like, yes, I took some pictures. Like, this is immaculate. I am the best gardener ever. All I did was put them in the ground basically, but tilled the ground and put them in there. I came inside. Layla wanted to go out, so I let her out and she came scratching on the door 30 minutes later and I opened the door and my heart sunk. I tell you what, every plant, and I'm not exaggerating, every plant that I planted was dug up, brought to the front porch. She had them hanging out of her mouth, covered in mud, and she was pumped. Like, Daddy, look what I've done. I know you didn't mean to leave these in the yard. It took everything in me to do but patience. Take a deep breath. Redo it again. It'll be okay. God blesses us in the weirdest ways sometimes. But His blessings are abundant, even in the simplicity of everyday life. And if you don't open your eyes up to that, then your life is going to be so less abundant and joyful. I'm telling you, God is there working. Open your eyes. Now, we don't have to just stop with the simplicity because, again, like I said before, God's always working. So how about the times of need? How about the times when you aren't prepared? Anybody not been prepared before? I'm raising my hand like half my life. Actually, more like 80% of my life, not prepared. God works in those seasons as well. So let's take a look where Jesus is always prepared, but His disciples, I felt like they were never prepared. Gives me great hope. Check this out. Matthew 15, verses 29 through 38. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. And then he went up to a mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet. And he healed them. And the people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, and the crippled made well, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they praised the God of Israel. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days, and they have nothing to eat. And I don't want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. And his disciple answered, gotta love their answers, Where could we get enough bread in such a remote place to feed such a crowd? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. He took the 7 loaves of fish, and 7 loaves and the fish, and he gave thanks, and he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. And they all ate and were satisfied. And afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children. You've got to love this story, right? Like, all the way from the very beginning of this story. For starters, he's healing all sorts of people. Can you imagine the scene of excitement? I mean, think about it. The lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, all sorts of people who have been suffering and struggling for who knows how long, and then in an instant, they're healed. Can you imagine? People who were unable to walk, like standing up and running around and jumping and shouting for joy because they're able to move like never before. You imagine the people who could not see getting to see light for the first time in years, or maybe the first time ever. Can you imagine the excitement that would be for someone if you'd never been able to see God's creation, and then in an instant, this man Jesus opens your eyes and you get to see the glory. Remember, they're on the mountain. They get to see the glory of God's landscape before them. How much joy, how much excitement must have been there. Those who had never been able to speak, shouting joy and praising Jesus for the first time, like the scene had to be full of passion and excitement like we have never seen before. People getting healed by the hundreds. It says there was 4,000 men, not including the women and children. Right? Like that is a ton of people. What an abundant day before Christ. Seeing him get to heal and love and have compassion for these people. And then Jesus sees that all these people are hungry, and he has compassion for them, wants to provide them a meal. And then the shock and unpreparedness of the disciples. Jesus, where are we going to get all this food for all these people? I mean, like, look out. Like, there's like, I can't count them. There's so many, Jesus. The embarrassment when the disciples come back with the 7 loaves and a few small fish. Like, Jesus asked what we had, so let's just be honest and bring them what we got. And then Jesus taking that bread, and Jesus taking those fish and blessing them and dividing them among the crowd, feeding 4,000 men, not including their wives and children. And then on top of that, again, God is an abundant God. On top of that, everyone eats their fill. They send around baskets and they collect 7 basketfuls of leftovers. I mean, talk about abundant. Talk about how God moves in such abundant ways. Jesus shows up at the right times, in the times of need, in the times when we aren't prepared, and he gives us gracious abundance. You gotta love how many times these disciples are just not prepared for what Jesus is about to do. You know that Jesus had to be thinking like, guys, are you ever going to figure this out? Like you've seen me do miracles like this before. This shouldn't be a shock. Thankfully, it gives me a lot of hope and a lot of peace knowing that he's probably thinking the same about me, and yet he continues to be gracious and he continues to be abundant. He has all things in his hands. So where in your life are there needs? Where in your life are you maybe unprepared and you need to start to look for the abundant works of Christ? And maybe, just maybe, you need to start to invite him into your situations. Maybe you need to ask. It's not that he'll answer maybe in the way that you think. I mean, even the disciples, again, they should have known exactly how Jesus would have answered this, but they didn't. But they asked. Even if it was a half-hearted ask, where could we get enough bread in such a remote place to feed such a crowd? I mean, it was kind of a half-hearted ask, but Jesus answers in his own ways and blesses abundantly. So what part of your life, what challenges right now do you need Jesus to step into? Do you need to ask him into and know that he will respond in his own abundant way? Maybe not the way that you expected, maybe not the way that you even wanted him to respond, but to know that Jesus hears our prayers and moves through our prayers. That Jesus does not just do the impossible sparingly, but he does the impossible in abundance. Impossible to Jesus is simple. So are you trusting God in abundance? Do you trust God with the impossible in your life because he is more than enough? God works in the simplicity of life. God works in the needs in our lives. God works in the times when we aren't prepared. And I want to share one more story today. I wish I had time again to do more and more stories because I love getting to read about Jesus and share about who Jesus is. And this one is really my favorite story for today. You hear Mark and I say, well, this is our favorite scripture or favorite passage like every other week, right? And at a certain point, you're like, hang on, how many favorites do you have? But it's hard, right? Like the more you read and the more God just kind of continues to show you, it's like, oh, this one's my favorite. Now this one's my favorite. No, God, this one's my favorite. We just can't decide because they're all so good. But really, this is my favorite story for this morning. And it's abundance in one of the darkest moments of someone's life, or what seems to be probably one of the darkest moments in someone's life. And it's so beautiful. And I've overlooked this story. I've overlooked this story. And when I read it, you're going to be like, all right, why is this your favorite, Matt? Like this one, why is this one? Let me read it to you. All right, Matthew 8, verses 1 through 4. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. And a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I'm willing, he said, be clean. And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. And then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourselves to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Now, I've read this many times in my life. And almost every time I read it, I just kind of pass it over. I think I've missed the significance. And I always read it and be like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool story. He healed somebody of skin disease. That's pretty cool. But you got like Jesus walking over water over here, and Jesus feeding 4,000 plus over here, and feeding 5,000 plus over here, and he's doing these extraordinary things. So this to me was just like, I read it and I was like, oh, that's really cool, but kind of just passed it over. But I just got done reading some of the Old Testament and Leviticus and some of the laws and whatnot, and really had an understanding before I read this of what it meant for someone to have leprosy, what it meant for their lives. So you got to understand the context of this passage if you're going to understand the importance of it. You have to understand that having leprosy during this time, or really any skin disease during this time, was considered a curse. And the Jewish people would treat you as if you were an outcast. Not only because they were afraid of you. If someone has a skin disease, you didn't want to catch it, and you didn't have modern medicine like we do today, and so people would be afraid to be around you. But the law also basically said that if you had a skin disease, leprosy, then you were an outcast. So not only were they afraid, but they were following the law. And I think we've got to understand what that truly means. And maybe we can, because we're in this time, we're coming on the back end of a pandemic. Hopefully we're getting closer and closer to getting through this. But we all know what isolation feels like right now, like in some way, shape, or form. Maybe some of us more than others, but I think about the elderly in the nursing home and how they've been isolated and not able to get out and not able to see their family members. Like, they know what it feels like to be an outcast during this time. Maybe some of you watching online, you know what it feels like to kind of feel like an outcast because you have some illnesses or you're choosing to stay away, and it's just put this strain on your life. Can you imagine? This is what this man felt like. But the problem with this is that leprosy isn't something that just typically, especially during this time without medicine that they didn't have, would not go away. Like, it just wouldn't go away. And so this person would have to live outside of the community in a camp by themselves, maybe with a few other people with skin disease, but they were an outcast. I mean, imagine this. Imagine not being able to see your kids. Imagine not being able to see your parents or your best friends because they couldn't literally see you or be close to you or hug you or give you a kiss or eat dinner with you because they too would then be considered an outcast. If you came in close contact with someone with leprosy during this time period, you would be outcast for a minimum of 7 days. 7 days. And then you'd have to come back into the priest and go through this process, and then they would send you back out if you didn't show signs of skin disease, and come back 3 days later. And then, and only then, if you still didn't show signs of skin disease, that you would be allowed back in the community. Like a complete and total outcast. So here we have this man who has leprosy, who is an outcast. A man who probably was lonely and desperate for companionship, missing his friends and his family, isolation from all of society. And we have Jesus. You got to love the beauty of this. Because at this time period, we've seen Jesus do all sorts of miracles, right? Jesus can just speak the words and heal someone 100 miles away. That's who Jesus is. He doesn't have to necessarily touch someone to have them be healed. He can just speak it. But Jesus is abundant. And Jesus reaches out and he touches this man's skin that's covered in leprosy. Probably the first human contact this man has had in who knows how long. He's starting to get the importance of this. Getting to feel someone actually embrace him and touch him for the first time ever. And it's the Son of God. He does the forbidden, touches this man, and heals him. Everyone else is afraid of this man. Everyone else has shut him out. The world has just shut him out. And Jesus kneels down and he touches him. Can you picture that? This man desperate for healing. This man desperate for attention. This man desperate for some sense of humanity. And he's throwing himself in a desperate plea at the feet of Jesus. And Jesus just bends down and looks at this man that everyone else is afraid of. And he just touches him and he heals him. You can just see him touching his face. What a beautiful, beautiful picture. The abundantness of Jesus. And instantly, this man is healed. This morning, I don't know what you're dealing with, but I want you to know that God is an abundant God. That Jesus is a God who can walk into your darkest moments and bring healing, and he can bring abundance. Started to ask the question, what if this man with leprosy would have given up? Like, everybody else has rejected me. Society has rejected me. I haven't gotten healing in who knows how long, and I'm just desperate. And so, this Jesus guy is going to do the same, and he would have just let that be his threshold, and he wouldn't have stepped over it. Like, what would have happened? His life would have never been changed. Never. But instead, he broke all protocol, venturing over to Jesus where there were crowds, which, by the way, was a no-no. Where for the first time, I love this, there were crowds in his territory. They were coming down the side of a mountain, probably for the first time in ever. There were thousands of people in his territory. There were thousands of people coming to the outcast home. And there he found himself before Jesus. The crowds were there, and he risked everything to venture into the crowd as a leper. And he throws himself at the feet of Jesus. The trouble this could have gotten him in. And with faith, he asked Jesus to come into his situation. And Jesus changes his life forever. I love that Jesus found himself on the outskirts of town teaching and healing more than he found himself in the towns. Because the outcasts, those who were sick, those who were in need, were on the outskirts of a town. And it just so happens to be that's where Jesus did some of the most amazing miracles. Jesus brought hope to those in need. Jesus brought abundance to those who were in need. And maybe you feel like a leper this morning. Maybe you feel like you're an outcast. But for Jesus, listen to me, for Jesus, your situation is not impossible. He can come in, he can bring hope in abundance. He can bring peace in abundance. He can bring healing in abundance. He can bring forgiveness in abundance. He can bring grace in abundance and life in abundance. Our God is an abundant God. And the enemy wants to keep you right where you're at. He wants to say, well, here's your line, don't cross it. He's going to put every fear, every roadblock in the way to keep you behind that threshold. Because we're all right on the threshold. We've already determined that Jesus is always working. And Satan wants to keep you right there. But what would it look like for you to take a step over that threshold? Just like the leper, he risked everything. He risked everything to put himself in a crowd. When he was supposed to be an outcast, he risked everything to throw himself at the feet of Jesus. He risked everything to have true faith, to say, Jesus, you can heal me, will you? Everything on the line. And maybe Jesus is asking you to do the same. You're on that threshold, and he's saying, son, daughter, just take a step. Just take a step. I'm abundant. You may think you're going to take a step and you're going to fall and tumble, but I'm abundant God. I've got this. I've got this. Stop trying to do it on your own. I am more than enough. I'm the one who can dream and imagine bigger than you could ever hope to. He's the one who says in John 10:10, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come so that they may have life and have it to the full. God wants a full life for you, not a held back life, not a life just on the cusp of a breakthrough. He wants a full, abundant life for you. Philippians 4:19, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Jesus Christ. He'll meet all our needs. That's the God we serve. So, what does your situation look like this morning? Are you on the threshold of something amazing and afraid to step over? So as we get ready to close out this morning, I just pray that God's putting on your heart, and for many of you, you know exactly what your threshold is. You know exactly where you need to invite Jesus into. It's probably an area that you've shut him out of, an area that you said, I got this. I'm big and tough and strong, and you keep finding yourself broken. And we need to be like the leper, find ourselves at the feet of Jesus, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the impossibility of it. And we need to say, Jesus, you're an abundant God. You're an abundant God, so come into my situation so that I can have a breakthrough, so that I can find peace and grace and mercy and truth and fun and play and laughter and humor and creativity. Where do you need to invite Jesus into today so that he can work in abundance? So I'm going to ask us to pray here. The praise team's going to come back up, but everybody just close their eyes. The first part of this prayer, I just want you to ask God. Ask God into those areas of your life that you need him most. Don't half do this. Fully turn it over to Jesus. I'll let you do that. Father, you meant our lives for so much more than to be held captive back from our fears and our worries. And so I pray this morning that you're placing on our hearts the very things that we've never let you into. And that we're letting you, for the first time ever, open up and to bring your abundance into our situation. You're a God of abundance in all sorts of ways. So this morning, Father, I just pray that you'll bring your abundance into every one of our lives, that we can start to see and step over those thresholds, that we can start to find breakthroughs, because you desire a full life for us, not one that we feel like we're being held back as a captive, that we can find freedom in you, Jesus. We just thank you for coming into the simplicity of our life and the everyday situations, into the complicated, into the times when we aren't prepared, and into our darkest moments. You're a God of abundance. And I pray that we'll open our eyes and we'll see it, and we'll allow you to work in the way that you see fit, to know that you are more than enough. And so we give our issues, our struggles, our problems, our thresholds to you. And we trust that we can find victory in some way, shape, or form in your way and in your will. So we love you. We lift this up in Jesus' name. Amen.